Before we begin, make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell, because you never know when an old coin hiding in a drawer, box, or family collection could turn out to be something collectors are searching for. If you enjoy discovering the stories and potential values behind old South African coins, stay with me until the very end, because today we are taking a close look at the fascinating 1 Rand 1974 from South Africa. At first glance, this coin may not look like something extraordinary. It is only a 1 Rand coin from more than 5 decades ago. But old coins have a special quality that modern money simply cannot replace. They carry memories, history, craftsmanship, and sometimes surprising collector demand. A coin that once passed through someone's hands during everyday life can eventually become an interesting piece for a serious collection. The 1974 1 Rand is especially interesting because it was not simply another ordinary coin from the period. It was produced as a commemorative issue connected with the 50th anniversary of the Pretoria Mint. That historical connection gives the coin an important place in South African numismatic history. According to current catalog information, the issue was struck in silver with a fineness of .800, weighs about 15 grams, and measures approximately 32.7 millimeters across. And here is where things become interesting for collectors. The value of an old coin is rarely determined by its face value alone. When you see 1 Rand on this coin, that does not mean its collector value is limited to 1 Rand. Collectors look much deeper. They examine the year, the historical purpose of the issue, the metal composition, the condition, the quality of the strike, and whether the coin belongs to a regular issue or a proof version. The 1974 issue is also notable because there were separate quantities recorded for the regular and proof versions. Catalog sources list 20,000 regular pieces and 15,000 proof pieces. That makes it worth checking your coin carefully before assuming it is just an old silver rand. Condition can make a dramatic difference. A coin that has been heavily circulated may show scratches, worn details, dull surfaces, or marks from years of handling. On the other hand, a coin that has been carefully preserved may retain much sharper details and more attractive surfaces. Collectors generally pay closer attention to coins that have survived in exceptional condition. So, if you have a 1974 1 Rand at home, don't rush to clean it. Cleaning an old collectible coin can damage its original surface and potentially reduce its appeal to collectors. Instead, examine it under good lighting and look closely at both sides, the lettering, the date, the edge, and the overall condition. But the biggest question is still waiting. How much could this 1974 South African 1 Rand actually be worth? And could a particularly desirable example be worth far more than you might expect? Keep watching, because in the next part we will look at the details collectors watch most carefully, what separates an ordinary example from a desirable one, and finally reveal the value figure you've been waiting for. Now let's take a closer look at what can make a 1974 1 Rand more interesting to collectors. The first thing to understand is that this coin is a commemorative silver issue celebrating the 50th anniversary of the South African Mint. It carries the 1974 date, while the reverse references 1923 and 1973, connecting the design to the history of minting in Pretoria. The coin was designed by Tommy Sassine, whose initials can be found on the coin. The design itself is one of the reasons this coin deserves attention. On one side you can see the South African coat of arms surrounded by the words, Sud Africa, and South Africa. On the other side is a fascinating arrangement of earlier South African coin designs surrounding the central mint door motif. This means the coin is almost like a miniature history lesson in metal. Another important point is the silver content. The coin weighs approximately 15 grams and is made from .800 fine silver. Current reference information puts its silver content at roughly 0.386 troy ounces. That gives the coin an underlying precious metal component even before collectors consider its historical and numismatic appeal. But don't make the mistake of thinking that every 1974 1 Rand automatically has an enormous value. This is where careful research becomes extremely important. Current catalog and grading references show that ordinary examples can trade at relatively modest prices, while exceptionally preserved examples can command substantially more. For example, PCGS records an auction result of $125 for a PCGS MS67 example, showing how condition can dramatically change the picture. There is also a proof version. Numismatic references list approximately 20,000 pieces for the regular issue and 15,000 for the proof issue. A proof coin was specially manufactured with collector presentation in mind, and its surfaces can have a noticeably different appearance from a normal strike. So what should you look for if one of these coins is sitting in your collection? Start with the surfaces. Hold the coin under a bright light and slowly tilt it. Look for scratches, hairlines, spots, dents, or signs that someone may have polished it. Original surfaces are highly important. A coin that looks shiny because it has been cleaned is not necessarily better than a naturally toned coin. Next, examine the sharpness of the design. The finer details should remain clear, especially on an example that has seen little handling. Check the lettering and the central design carefully. Then inspect the edge. The 1974 issue has a reeded edge, so unusual damage or alterations around the edge deserve attention. And remember, rarity does not always mean old. A coin can be more desirable because fewer examples were produced, because fewer survived in excellent condition, or because collectors actively seek a particular version. That is why an old coin sitting quietly in a family collection can be worth examining before you dismiss it. Now we reach the moment many collectors have been waiting for. The value figure for this video is $1,282. But this should be understood as a featured high-value figure for the video, not a guaranteed price for every 1974 1 rand. Real-world selling prices depend on authenticity, condition, grading, proof or regular status, market demand, and the buyer. Current published guides show much lower typical values for many examples, while certified high-grade pieces can bring stronger prices. So if you own a 1974 South African 1 rand, don't throw it into a box with ordinary loose change. Protect it, avoid cleaning it, and have it properly evaluated if you believe you have an exceptional example. Sometimes the smallest piece of history can become the most interesting discovery in an old collection in collectible. If you enjoy discovering historic coins, learning how collectors judge value, and exploring the stories hidden inside old currency, stay with us until the end, because today we are taking a close look at the South African 1 cent from 1970. At first glance, this tiny coin may not look particularly exciting. It is small, simple, and was produced for everyday circulation more than 5 decades ago. But that is exactly what makes old coins so interesting. A coin that once passed from hand to hand in shops, homes, pockets, and cash registers can eventually become a piece of history for collectors. The 1970 South African 1 center belongs to an important period in the country's decimal coinage history. According to Namista's catalog information, around 37,072,000 examples of the regular 1970 issue were produced, while a separate proof issue had a reported mintage of only 10,000 pieces. That difference is important because collectors generally look much more closely at special strikes, proof examples, unusual varieties, and coins preserved in exceptional condition. So if you have a 1971 cent sitting inside an old box, coin jar, drawer, or family collection, do not immediately assume that every example has the same value. The date alone does not determine what a coin is worth. One of the biggest factors is condition. Imagine 2 identical 1971 cent coins. One has spent decades circulating. Its surfaces are scratched, the details are worn, and the original appearance has disappeared. The other has been carefully protected for most of its life, with strong details, clean surfaces, and very little evidence of handling. Even though both coins carry exactly the same date, collectors may view them very differently. This is one of the most important lessons for anyone beginning to collect older coins. Rarity matters, but condition can make an enormous difference. The standard 1970 issue is not considered extremely rare simply because it is more than 50 years old. In fact, catalog information shows indicative values for ordinary examples ranging from only a few cents upward depending on condition. Those figures are guide estimates rather than guaranteed selling prices, and actual market results can vary. But there is another reason you should inspect your coin carefully. Collectors are always interested in details that separate one example from another. Look closely at the lettering, numbers, design elements, rims, and overall strike. A coin with an unusual error, variety, or exceptional preservation can attract attention even when the normal version is common. And this is where the story becomes much more exciting. A coin does not have to be made from precious metal to be collectible. Sometimes the historical connection, age, design, scarcity of a particular variety, or quality of preservation creates the interest. For people who grew up around older South African currency, a 1970 coin can also carry something that cannot be measured by a catalog price: memories. Think about how many people may have handled this little coin during the early 1970s. It could have been used to buy something small at a local shop. It might have sat inside a child's pocket, been placed into a household savings container, or remained in a drawer for years. Every mark on an old circulated coin can be a reminder that it once had a practical purpose in everyday life. That historical connection is one reason older coins continue to attract collectors around the world. Now, before we reveal the value figure featured in today's video, there is something very important to understand. A large number printed in an online video or social media post does not automatically mean every coin of that year is worth that amount. The actual value of a specific coin depends on authenticity, condition, variety, demand, and whether it has been professionally evaluated or sold in a genuine marketplace. So don't clean your coin just because it looks dark or dirty. Cleaning can remove original surfaces and potentially reduce collector appeal. Instead, handle it carefully by the edges and compare its details with reliable coin references. And now, we are getting closer to the number everyone has been waiting for. For this video, the featured potential value of the South African 1 cent 1970 is $1,468. But remember, this should be treated as a dramatic featured value for the video, not as a guaranteed price for every 1971 cent. The ordinary circulated examples can be worth substantially less, while an unusual, exceptionally preserved, proof, or otherwise desirable example could attract a different level of collector interest. That distinction is extremely important, especially if you are searching through an old collection. So before you spend, sell, or trade your 1971 cent, take a second look. Check the date, examine the surfaces, inspect the design carefully, and compare your coin with trusted references. Sometimes the smallest coins can hold the biggest surprises. And remember, the real treasure is not always the number attached to a coin. Sometimes it is the history that coin has carried for more than 50 years. If you enjoyed this discovery, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because there are many more old coins waiting to be examined, and your next forgotten coin could be the one that deserves a much closer look. There is one detail on this coin that collectors should never overlook. The 1971 cent carries the initials TS, associated with engraver Tommy Sassing. The coin features the South African coat of arms on one side and Cape Sparrows with the denomination on the other. It was struck in bronze, weighing about 3 grams and measuring just over 19 millimeters across. Those details may sound small, but when you are examining an old coin, small details can make a big difference. Take your time and inspect the rim. Look at the lettering. Study the date. Check whether the design is sharply defined or heavily worn. Compare the coin with photographs of authenticated examples. If you believe you have something unusual, avoid polishing it or using harsh chemicals. A collector would generally rather see an original surface than a coin that has been aggressively cleaned. Another interesting point is the mintage. Numista records approximately 37,072,000 regular 1971 cent coins, while a 1970 proof issue is listed separately with a mintage of 10,000. That tells us something important. Simply finding a 1970 date does not automatically make a coin rare. The regular issue was produced in a substantial quantity. What can make an individual coin more interesting is its condition, strike, variety, provenance, or whether it belongs to a special issue. And this is exactly why experienced collectors never judge an old coin only by its face value. 1 cent may sound almost worthless today, but the historical journey behind the coin can be far more interesting than the denomination itself. More than half a century has passed since 1970. People who remember that era may recognize just how different everyday life and money once looked. For collectors, that connection creates something special. Now comes the moment many viewers have been waiting for. The featured value we are using for this video is $1,468. But please remember this number carefully. $1,468 is a featured potential value for an exceptional or specially desirable example, not a guaranteed selling price for every 1970 South African 1 center. Current catalog information for ordinary 1970 examples is dramatically lower, with indicative values generally measured in cents depending on condition. So if you have one, don't assume you have a $1,468 coin simply because it says 1970. Instead, consider it a reason to investigate. Your coin could be heavily circulated and worth very little. It could be unusually well preserved. It could be a proof. It could have a feature that deserves further research. Or it could simply be a wonderful piece of South African history that you keep because of the memories attached to it. And sometimes, that is the greatest value of all. Before you put your coin away, take a clear look at both sides under good lighting. Never rush the examination, and never clean the coin simply to make it look newer. If you enjoyed this journey into the 1970 South African 1 center, subscribe to the channel and stay with us for more fascinating coin discoveries. There are millions of old coins still sitting unnoticed in collections, drawers, boxes, and family keepsakes. The next coin you discover might be the one that makes you stop and look twice. It could turn out to be something worth investigating. If you enjoyed discovering the stories and possible values behind old South African coins, stay with us until the very end, because today we are taking a close look at the South Africa 5 cents 1979 Diedrichs coin. At first glance, this little 5-cent coin may not look particularly exciting. It is small, simple, and made from an ordinary-looking metal. But collectors know that a coin does not have to be large, made of gold, or covered in precious metal to become interesting. Sometimes the real attraction is the history attached to the coin, the person represented on it, the design, the condition, and the details that separate an ordinary example from a collectible one. The 1979 5 cents is especially interesting because it belongs to a memorable period in South African coinage. The coin carries the portrait of Nicholas Johannes Diedrichs, with the inscriptions identifying South Africa in both English and Afrikaans. On the opposite side is a beautiful blue crane design along with the 5-cent denomination. These details give the coin an identity that goes far beyond its small face value. And this is exactly why you should never judge an old coin simply by the number printed on it. Imagine finding one of these coins after decades of being forgotten. Perhaps it came from a parent's old collection, a grandparent's belongings, an old coin jar, or a box that has been sitting untouched for years. You might see 5 cents and assume it is worth only a few cents. But collectors examine old coins differently. They look at the date, design, condition, strike quality, surface preservation, and whether the coin has unusual characteristics. The 1979 issue was not an extremely tiny production. Catalog information records a large circulation mintage, while a much smaller proof issue was also produced. That distinction matters because proof coins can have a very different collector appeal from normal circulated examples. Condition is another major factor. A coin that spent years moving through everyday circulation may show scratches, dull surfaces, marks, or worn details. Another example may have sharp lettering, clear design elements, attractive surfaces, and very little evidence of circulation. To an untrained eye, both coins may look almost identical. To an experienced collector, however, the difference can be significant. That is why the first thing you should do when you discover a 1979 5 cents is resist the temptation to clean it. Cleaning can damage the original surface and may actually make a collectible coin less desirable. Instead, hold it carefully by the edges and examine it under good lighting. Look closely at the date. Check the portrait. Study the lettering. Turn the coin over and inspect the blue crane design. Look around the rim and examine the surfaces for unusual marks or possible minting characteristics. And most importantly, don't assume that every 1979 5 cents has the same value. Published collector references currently show ordinary examples at relatively modest values depending on condition, while proof examples are treated separately. So if someone tells you that every 1979 5 cents is automatically worth thousands of dollars, be careful. Coin values depend heavily on authenticity, condition, rarity, variety, demand, and actual market evidence. But there is still one number connected with this coin that you will want to hear before this video ends. There is another important detail that makes this coin worth examining carefully. The 1979 5 cents exists in both regular circulation and proof versions. Reference records list about 17,533,000 regular coins and around 17,000 proof examples. That does not automatically make the proof version extremely expensive, but it does make it a different category for collectors. So how can you tell whether the coin in your hand deserves extra attention? Start with the overall appearance. A normal circulated coin will usually have signs of everyday use. The high points of the portrait may become softer, the crane may lose some of its finer details, and the fields can develop scratches and small contact marks. A coin that has remained carefully preserved for decades can look dramatically different. Proof pieces are particularly interesting because they were produced with special preparation and were intended for collectors rather than ordinary circulation. If you believe you have a proof example, do not assume it is valuable simply because it looks shiny. Authenticity, surfaces, grading, and the exact characteristics of the coin still matter. Another thing that makes old coins fascinating is the possibility of unusual minting characteristics. Collectors sometimes search for double details, striking problems, unusual die characteristics, or other abnormalities. But this is where patience becomes important. A scratch caused after the coin left the mint is not automatically a valuable mint error. Damage, corrosion, polishing, and ordinary wear can easily be mistaken for an error. This is why serious collectors examine coins under magnification and compare them with known examples. They do not rely only on a photograph or a dramatic claim about a huge price. And there is something else you should remember. The value of a coin can change over time. Collector interest, auction results, condition, rarity, and demand can all influence what someone is willing to pay. A price shown online is not necessarily the same as the amount a buyer will actually pay for your individual coin. For the 1979 5 cents, published reference values for ordinary examples are generally modest, with condition making a noticeable difference. Numista's current indications range from only a few cents for worn examples to around $1 or slightly more for uncirculated examples, while proof examples are listed separately. These figures are estimates rather than guarantees. So if you have this coin, the smartest approach is not to immediately sell it or clean it. First, identify exactly what you have. Check the date, denomination, portrait, reverse design, surface condition, and whether it may be a proof or unusual variety. Now comes the part that many viewers have been waiting for. You may have seen claims that a 1979 South African 5 cents Diedrichs coin could be worth as much as $1,583. But that number should not be interpreted as the guaranteed value of every 1979 5 cents. Current catalog references do not support a normal circulated example being worth anywhere near that amount. If a coin really reached a value around $1,583, there would need to be something exceptional behind that price, such as extraordinary preservation, a verified rarity, an important variety or error, or strong evidence from an actual sale. That is why the most valuable thing you can have as a coin collector is not excitement alone. It is knowledge. So check your old coin collection one more time. Look through those forgotten containers, family albums, and boxes of coins. That little 5 cents from 1979 may not automatically be a four-figure treasure, but it is certainly an interesting piece of South African numismatic history. And if your particular coin has the right combination of condition, rarity, authenticity, and collector demand, that's when the story can become much more interesting. The claimed high-end figure we have been waiting for is $1,583. Remember, that should be treated as a potential or claimed value, not a guaranteed price for every 1979 Diedrich's 5 cents. If you enjoyed this coin discovery, subscribe to the channel, because our next old coin could be hiding another surprising story ignored for years. It is the 5 cents coin dated 2007, and if you have one sitting inside an old collection, a box of coins, or even a forgotten drawer, you may want to take a second look before spending it. At first glance, the 2007 South African 5 cents coin does not look like something extraordinary. It is small, familiar, and was made for everyday circulation. But coin collecting has taught us an important lesson: never judge a coin only by its face value. The real interest can come from its condition, production details, unusual examples, and the story behind the coin. The 2007 5 cents belongs to a fascinating period in modern South African coinage. The coin is copper-plated steel, weighs around 4.5 grams, and measures about 21 millimeters across. Its design features the South African national arms on one side, while the other side features the famous blue crane along with the 5C denomination. There is also something particularly interesting about the design. The coin reflects South Africa's multilingual identity, with the country's official languages represented across the coin series of this period. That makes these pieces more than simple spending money. For collectors, they can represent a snapshot of South Africa during the early years of the 21st century. Now here is where things become interesting. More than 653 million examples of the 2007 circulation issue were produced, meaning an ordinary circulated example is not generally considered rare. Current catalog estimates for circulated pieces are typically only a small amount above face value, while a very well-preserved example can be worth more to collectors. Numista, for example, currently lists indicative values ranging from roughly 17 cents in lower grades to about 49 cents for an uncirculated example, while emphasizing that these figures are estimates rather than guaranteed selling prices. So why would collectors still care about this coin? Because condition can completely change the conversation. Imagine finding a 2007 5 cents that has spent years protected from scratches, moisture, fingerprints, and heavy circulation. The original details may still be sharp. The surfaces may look clean. The lettering may remain crisp, and the design may have very little wear. That kind of example can attract considerably more attention than a heavily worn coin. And there is another category that collectors should not overlook: proof examples. Records show a very small proof production of only 1,280 pieces for 2007. These specially produced coins were not intended to circulate in the same way as ordinary examples, making them much more interesting to collectors when correctly identified. This is why you should never assume that every 2007 5 cents coin is identical. Before you decide what your coin is worth, examine it carefully under good lighting. Look at the date first. Then inspect the national arms, lettering, crane design, edge, and overall surface. Search for unusual characteristics, striking problems, damaged areas, or anything that looks different from a normal example. But remember, damage is not automatically an error. A scratch made after the coin left the mint is usually just damage. A genuine mint error is something that occurred during production, and collectors can treat confirmed errors very differently from ordinary wear. The next step is perhaps the most important one: learning how to separate a normal 2007 5 cents from an example that deserves closer attention. And this is where many people make a mistake. They see a small coin, notice a strange mark, and immediately assume they have discovered a fortune. But experienced collectors slow down. They compare the coin, study the details, check the condition, and only then consider its potential value. So, if you have a 2007 5-cent coin, don't throw it away and don't polish it. Keep watching, because in the second part we will look at the details that can make one example more interesting than another, how collectors judge condition, what kind of 2007 5 cents deserves special attention, and finally, the $1,496 figure connected with today's video. Now let's get to the part every collector wants to know. What should you actually look for if you have a South African 5 cents from 2007? The first thing is condition. A coin that has spent years moving through thousands of hands will naturally collect scratches, small dents, discoloration, and surface wear. That is completely normal. But a coin that still has strong details, clean surfaces, and very little evidence of circulation can be much more appealing to collectors. The 2007 5 cents is made from copper-plated steel, weighs approximately 4.5 grams, and has a diameter of about 21 millimeters. The edge is plain, while the design shows the South African coat of arms on one side and the blue crane with the 5C denomination on the other. One fascinating detail is the lettering. This coin belongs to a series that represents South Africa's multilingual character, with the country's official languages incorporated across the coinage. For someone collecting South African history, that gives this little 5-cent piece a cultural importance that goes beyond its monetary denomination. Now, let's talk about rarity. The standard 2007 circulation issue had a mintage of approximately 653,408,000 pieces. That is a huge number, so you should not assume that every 2007 5 cents is rare or automatically valuable. Current catalog information places ordinary examples at modest values, with Namista's indicative figures ranging from about 17 cents in lower circulated grades to around 49 cents for an uncirculated example. NGC's guide also shows values generally remaining low for standard examples, while listing a higher figure for a proof example. But here is the detail that can make your search much more interesting. There were only about 1,280 proof examples recorded for 2007. A proof coin is produced with special preparation and handling, and it is intended primarily for collectors rather than ordinary circulation. NGC currently lists a guide value of about $5 for a 2007 proof 5 cents, although actual prices can vary depending on authenticity, condition, certification, and buyer demand. So if you find a 2007 5 cents that looks unusually sharp, reflective, and carefully struck, do not immediately assume it is an ordinary circulation coin. Compare it closely with a normal example. Another important warning: never clean the coin. This is especially important for older coins because people sometimes believe polishing will make them look newer and therefore more valuable. In reality, cleaning can leave unnatural scratches and surface damage that collectors may dislike. If your coin appears interesting, preserve it exactly as you found it. And what about errors? This is where collectors become extremely careful. A genuine mint error can sometimes make a common coin far more desirable, but not every unusual-looking mark is an error. A scratch, dent, stain, or damage caused by another coin is not automatically a minting mistake. If you think your 2007 5 cents has an unusual production error, compare it with authenticated examples before making any major claim about its value. The best approach is simple: protect the coin, photograph both sides clearly, inspect it under magnification, and compare every detail with the standard 2007 example. And now we reach the number many viewers have been waiting for. You may have seen claims online suggesting that a South African 5 cents from 2007 can be worth an astonishing $1,496. But we need to be very careful here. That figure should not be treated as the normal market value of an ordinary 2007 5 cents. Established catalog information indicates that typical examples are worth only modest amounts, while special proof or exceptional examples can command more. So why mention $1,496? Because today's video is about recognizing the possibility that a particular coin could have unusual characteristics, not telling you that every 2075 cents is worth $1,496. A dramatic value claim should always be backed by an actual sale, certification, rarity, and condition. For collectors, the real lesson is much more valuable than a single dollar figure. That tiny 5-cent coin can teach you how to examine dates, designs, minting quality, condition, and rarity. It can remind you that the coins we handle every day can eventually become pieces of history. So before you spend that old 2007 5 cents, take a closer look. Check the date. Study the crane. Examine the national arms. Inspect the surface. Look for unusual production characteristics, and most importantly, protect the coin from cleaning or unnecessary handling. Because sometimes the most interesting discovery isn't the coin that looks expensive at first glance. It's the ordinary-looking coin that makes you stop, look twice, and ask one simple question: what exactly am I holding? And that is the real excitement of coin collecting. One small coin can open the door to history, craftsmanship, rarity, and a story that may have been sitting quietly in your collection for years. In their original face value, you definitely do not want to miss today's story. Today, we are taking a closer look at the South African 1 cent from 1961, a coin connected to one of the most important turning points in South African monetary history. At first glance, this little coin may seem ordinary. It is small, simple, and easy to overlook. But when you examine its history, design, varieties, condition, and collector demand, the story becomes much more interesting. The 1961 1 cent belongs to South Africa's first decimal coinage series. This was the year South Africa moved into the rand and cent currency system, making this coin an important piece for collectors interested in the beginning of the decimal era. The standard 1961 issue is listed as a brass coin weighing about 9.42 grams and measuring roughly 31 millimeters across. That larger size can make the coin particularly interesting when compared with many later South African 1 cent pieces. It carries the portrait of Jan van Riebeeck on the obverse, while the reverse features a covered wagon, giving the coin a strong historical character. The wording includes both English and Afrikaans, reflecting the bilingual presentation used on the coinage of the period. But here is where things become exciting for collectors. Not every 1961 1 cent is necessarily worth the same amount. A coin's value can change dramatically depending on its exact variety, condition, surface quality, strike, and whether it has an unusual feature that separates it from the normal issue. According to current catalog information, around 52,266,000 examples of the standard 1961 issue are recorded, so the ordinary circulated version is not automatically a rare fortune. Current indicative values listed for the regular coin range from roughly 55 cents in lower circulated grades to around $2 in uncirculated condition. These are only guide values, not guaranteed selling prices. However, there is another reason serious collectors pay attention to this particular year. A documented 1961 variety is associated with the wagon design having full ground cover underneath it. This variety is identified as Hernar 5, and the catalog notes that the original mintage may have been around 80 pieces, with only 12 known according to Hearn's estimate. That is an enormous difference compared with the millions of regular examples. And this is exactly why you should never judge an old coin simply by looking at its denomination. A coin marked 1 cent may have started with almost no purchasing power, but its historical importance, variety, and condition can make it fascinating to collectors decades later. There is also a documented 1961 proof issue, with 7,530 pieces listed. The catalog gives an indicative value of about $3.10 for the proof example, although actual market prices can vary considerably depending on grade and authenticity. The biggest lesson here is that condition matters. A heavily worn coin with scratches, stains, corrosion, or damaged surfaces will generally attract less attention than a sharply struck example with strong details and attractive surfaces. Collectors carefully examine the portrait, lettering, wagon design, rims, and overall preservation before deciding how desirable a coin may be. So if you have a 1961 1 cent sitting inside an old collection, family box, drawer, or inherited coin album, do not clean it immediately. Cleaning can damage the original surface and potentially reduce collector appeal. Instead, handle it carefully by the edges and examine both sides under good lighting. And there is still one major question left. Could a remarkable example of this seemingly tiny South African coin be worth far more than ordinary catalog values suggest? The answer becomes especially interesting when we look at exceptional certified examples and the rare variety connected with the wagon design. Now we come to the part of the story that could make a collector look at a 1961 South African 1 center very differently. The normal 1961 issue had a recorded mintage of more than 52 million pieces. So simply finding a coin dated 1961 does not mean you have a rare treasure. But hidden among the ordinary examples is a spectacular variety known for its full ground cover beneath the wagon on the reverse. Numista identifies this as Hearn R5 and notes Hearn's estimate of roughly 80 originally produced, with only a small number known. And the auction record shows just how dramatically rarity can change the value. In April 2026, Heritage Auction sold a 1961 South African Republic Center graded MS66 by NGC, identified as the full ground cover variety, for $6,710. The auction description states a mintage of 80 and 20 known examples. That is a completely different level from the ordinary 1961 cent. So when someone asks, "How much is my 1961 1 cent worth?" the honest answer is that there is no single value. A normal circulated example can be worth only a small amount, while an exceptional rare variety in high grade can bring thousands. There is even evidence of strong collector interest in South Africa itself. A full ground cover 1961 1 cent was recorded as selling for R40,500 in a Bob's Shop auction in January 2023. This demonstrates that collectors have been willing to pay substantial amounts for the rare variety, although individual auction results should never be treated as a guaranteed price for every coin. So what should you look for? Start with the reverse. Find the covered wagon and carefully inspect the area underneath it. The rare full ground cover variety is distinguished by the amount of ground detail beneath the wagon. This is not something you should identify from a quick glance alone. If you believe your coin may have the variety, compare it with trusted references or have it examined by a knowledgeable specialist. Next, examine the condition. Look for sharp details, clean lettering, a strong rim, and minimal damage. Scratches, corrosion, heavy cleaning, dents, or excessive wear can significantly affect desirability. An untouched original surface is generally much more attractive to serious collectors than a coin that has been polished. And please remember one important rule: do not clean the coin. That old-looking surface may actually be part of its collectible appeal. Cleaning can leave permanent marks and may reduce the coin's desirability. Hold it carefully by the edges and keep it protected from unnecessary handling. The ordinary 1961 coin also has its own historical importance. It belongs to South Africa's first decimal series and was struck in brass, with a weight of approximately 9.42 grams and a diameter of about 31 millimeters. Its obverse features Jan van Riebeek, while the reverse displays the covered wagon. For a normal example, catalog indications are much more modest. Numista currently lists approximately 55 cents for lower circulated grades and about $2 for an uncirculated standard example, while a 1961 proof is listed around $3.10. These are indicative figures, not guaranteed selling prices. But now comes the value we promise you. If your 1961 South African 1 center is the exceptionally rare full ground cover variety, and especially if it is preserved in outstanding condition and authenticated by a respected grading service, its value can reach into the thousands of dollars. A documented 2026 auction result reached $6,710 for an MS66 example. For this video, the eye-catching value figure is $1,288, but remember that this should be presented as a potential or featured value rather than a guaranteed price for every 1961 1 cent. The actual value depends on variety, authenticity, condition, certification, and what collectors are willing to pay at the time. So before you dismiss that tiny old coin as worthless, take another look. Check the date. Check the wagon. Check the ground beneath it. And most importantly, check the condition. Sometimes the greatest discoveries are not hidden in huge collections or expensive display cases. Sometimes they are sitting quietly inside an old coin box, waiting for someone to recognize the detail that everyone else overlooked. If you enjoyed this discovery, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because there are many more old South African coins with fascinating stories, unusual varieties, and surprising collector values waiting to be uncovered.